This past year, the two of us traveled alone to all 50 states.
We were 17 years old.
We had just graduated high school.
And we'd raised all the money ourselves for the trip. Our goal was to interview hundreds of people about how race, culture, and other parts of their identity have impacted their lives.
The trip was hard. We heard stories that changed us forever. And we felt intensely the trauma that people shared.
They cried.
We cried.
We all cried.
Later, we missed our parents and we cried more.
In Montana, we were too scared to interview downtown after our host told us about the white supremacists everywhere.
In Kansas, we interviewed a man who was shot after being told, "Go back to your country."
In Virginia, we interviewed a mother who showed us videos of her daughter laughing just a few weeks before she was killed in the Charlottesville protests.
The youngest person we interviewed was a toddler in Michigan whose role model is Beyoncé.
The oldest, a Japanese-American internment camp survivor in Washington, whose role model is also Beyoncé.
Yet, among all the challenges, one was clearly the hardest.
Being together.
Every
Moment.
every
Day.
I mean, can you imagine traveling and living with any one of your high school friends for over 250 days?
It became the experience we grew from the most because we really got to understand each other a lot better. We want to share something we learned that improved and saved many of our relationships, including our own. It's something we call racial and cultural intimacy. Let us explain.
In high school, when we first started trying to develop racial literacy in our own state, we would spend hours sitting on the stoops of sidewalks, in coffee shops, in people's homes, listening to strangers talk about race. We started to realize that we felt closer to some of these complete strangers than we did to most of our best friends, including each other.
Because all our lives, conversations with people we knew were about ego stories. You know, who are you dating? What grades did you get? Where'd you go for vacation? But now we were listening to soul stories. Stories that got real, stories about identity, about insecurities, fears, joys, and hopes. And race is not only one of the things that affect us the most, but also one of the most difficult to talk about.
And so here we were, we had taken a gap year before college together, and we knew we had to survive together. But we kept arguing. And we started to realize we just didn't fully understand each other all the time. So we had to start from the beginning. We talked about our childhoods, how growing up we had a tremendous love and gratitude for our parents, but also a painful cultural disconnect.
Because while my friend's parents explicitly said, "I love you," I was hurt that my parents didn't. Instead, they expressed their love in other ways, like shoving food down my face.
And because while the cool, wealthy girls went to country clubs on the weekends, I felt unnecessarily punished because my parents just made me practice 9 hours of Mandarin. It took me 15 years to truly feel grateful instead.
We talked about our disgust and suspicion from being fetishized as, quote, cute Asian girls, and how we're always perceived as naive and weak.
And while for so long we were told that to be Asian American meant that we were the same, only this past year did we recognize that even though we do share many common child of immigrant experiences, to be Chinese American and to be Indian American are very different. Only this past year did I notice myself not fully validating Priya's experience as the darkest-skinned girl in her family, and how that made her feel unseen, literally unseen in the poorly lit selfies that I and others would take. I should have owned my privileges and listened. I should have realized this is something I can never fully understand.
And it was wrong for me to, meanwhile, call Winona's skin basically white and assume that just her skin color was a ticket to whiteness. She once texted me,
"So, do I use the yellow emoji or the light brown one? Definitely not the darker brown one or the white one, right?"
I shouldn't have invalidated not only this country's long, shameful history with Chinese Americans, but also how others close to Winona have always asked her to make her non-Anglo features just basically more white, saying, "Winona, make your eyes bigger, your nose taller, your jaw sharper, and your body thinner." These are all experiences I could never fully understand.
We were the most vulnerable that we have ever been.
We argued, we cried.
We healed in coffee shops over extra large lattes.
We got to know each other a lot better, and that gave our friendship the space to deal with the more trivial arguments during our trip, like couch surfing with someone who kicks in their sleep.
Or that time we got bed bugs in West Virginia and someone hid all the anti-itch cream for self-usage.
Bottom line, it is hard to love, non-romantically or romantically, another human being. But by knowing each other more deeply, we were less likely to flip out and say hurtful words over the trivial things. We were more likely to be kind to one another and talk constructively about what we wanted to do differently.
Imagine if we did really take the time to know one another, not just a birthday post or a like or a conversation of ego stories. Imagine if sharing soul stories was the norm. We would all have space for more compassion. So today, we call on our generation to prioritize racial and cultural intimacy. Let's have the courage to fully understand the people that we already love or want to love. This doesn't mean go find your nearest friend of color and force them to talk about race. This also doesn't mean you need to travel with somebody for 250 days. This just means investing ourselves into digging deeper into our soul stories and how they have shaped our lives. Share your story with someone else, a parent,
Best friend,
roommate,
co-founder,
partner,
and listen to their stories.
We have a great idea on how to start.
Watch this talk with them. Thank you.